Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, March 12th, 2014 meeting of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. First item on the agenda are minutes, February 12th. I have okay.
I will move to approve the minutes from the 12th.
I will second. Either way.
Motion in 2 seconds to approve the minutes on the 12th. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. The 19th and the 26th were,
We'll get the 19th tomorrow.
okay,
I don't even have the disc for the 26th.
We're working on getting the disc without.
okay, and when you get it, we'll get it.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in St. Martin next week, so.
Oh. It'll be kind of fun. It might rain down there.
That's a horrible thing to say.
Hey, I used to live 100 miles from there. Okay, minutes of March 5th. You have the same change I do?
I doubt it. I probably have a different change.
Well, I have a change on page 4. Comments were submitted by Barbara Frappier and Holmes and McGrath. I'll give it to you. Yep.
Down near the bottom, about 4 lines, five lines up, it says.
What page?
Huh?
What page?
Page 4.
Okay.
And I make the statement that staked hay bales should be going the whole way. They were talking about along the edge of the boundary.
Right.
And I made a point that the staking should be that the bales go on this side of the property line. You follow, so there's no one. And I want that clear in the minutes that the staking of the hay bales. If the hay bales are 2 feet wide, then it's 2 feet. Then the inside edge of the hay bales is 2 feet off the property line.
Okay.
However that gets stated, but you understand. I don't want them impinging on the neighboring property.
Is page 3 missing?
Yeah, page 3 is missing, that's why.
Yeah, but actually, we can't vote these yet because page 3 was missing.
Oh,
Yeah, because I was on 5 for all
I
of
wonder
that.
it went so quick.
So, yeah, so I don't think we should vote them, but. Okay. Other business. Discussion of a potential conservation restriction for Oyster Pond Environmental Trust parcel. Bill?
Thank you.
I'll be back in just a second. Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have one for Jen?
I'll go share with her.
Okay. Okay, we've seen it.
At any rate, I'm Bill Kerfoot. I'm Vice President of Oyster Pond Environmental Trust. I'm filling in for Wendy Bissler, who's at Fukushima right now in Japan with her husband, and otherwise would be here. But my main, Wendy suggested that I come here, and in my role as Vice President, to introduce you just very briefly to Oyster Pond Environmental Trust. Many of you know us. We've been incorporated since 1995. Our major concern is Oyster Pond, which is over here. And we are a conservation organization. Our main purpose is protect land and watershed of Oyster Pond. We previously had purchased the Stan Fisher property, which is now Zinn Park, 7.5 acres here. And this parcel that we're talking about, which is 22 acres, 5 parcels, are currently owned by Hui and lie between Zinn Park and Spore Gardens. Here's Oyster Pond. The property itself is 22 acres. It completes the headwaters of a main stream and the only stream that goes out to Oyster Pond, across here and into the northern end. It has substantial wetlands across this area. When we purchased Zinn Park, about half of it is wetlands, connected up with the main stream out. This completes the amount of wetlands that are associated with that stream connection, which is also managed by mosquito control. The parcel that we're dealing with has frontage on Oyster Pond. It has substantial wetlands on the tail end of the creek area. It also has 2 potential vernal pools located on it. The remaining area is uplands, wooded uplands. And there is a smaller portion of this that goes directly out to Oyster Pond. Basically, this is Fells Road, which comes in to the bottom portion of it. And then also, this is Ransom Road on the northern portion of it that bounds clear along this side. Our main concern associated with the property and why we have talked with Hui, the owner is Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. They're very cooperative. We've been talking with them for some period of time about acquiring the land area. We mainly want to avoid development of this parcel. By zoning, it could hold up to 70 units under affordable housing. We did already appraisals for the property. We did their own too. We ended up with basically about 12 lots that could be developed on this if it went the regular residential bylaws. But it can be very larger if there are other credits that are given associated with it. Presently, Oyster Pond is under review by engineering firms with regard to development of best management program for it to reduce nitrogen. In Oyster Pond, we have to reduce the total amount of nitrogen content by about 65%. Wright Pierce is the contractor for the town who's preparing the best management plan. There is no question that if we had to deal with 10 to 70 residential developments in this particular area, not only would you have substantial impacts, it could be disastrous on Oyster Pond, but you'd also have significant runoff associated with it, since there are coastal banks that extend clear into the property and during heavy rains run out here and of course run into the Oyster Pond area. We feel that the area, as we had with Zinn Park, we've maintained it for many years. We maintain it as a conservation area. We put walk paths throughout it, and we conduct trips on it at different times. Wendy, also taking the lead on that as our executive director, has instituted some programs on the Zinn Park area for improving the vegetation that's there. And so we have done not only Phragmites harvesting for improving the shoreline areas, which by the way have brought back some rare species. She's been very good at that. And then also there are a variety of different invasive species on this area that we've had programs for removing the invasives and encouraging the native species to come back. One of the main reasons that I'm here now in front of you, I assume, has to do with the town article on 16 with a special town meeting that's coming up. And with that, in regard, we are in the fundraising road at the present time with regard to an article by the CPC to appropriate a certain amount of money toward the purchase of this property. We also, as we started to last year, we're moving forward with the land grant, LAND, to acquire funds from the state to assist in this. And an important part of this process is the Conservation Commission. You will hold a CR bought by the town and the Conservation Commission on this land. And this puts it into conservation and is very appropriate from our organization standpoint for that to be done.
Okay, so Bill, so my understanding is, well, actually, I don't have an understanding. Who would actually own the property?
Okay. Currently, the main aspect of it is that Oyster Pond Environmental Trust would be deeded the ownership from a maintenance standpoint. So you have an entity who maintains the property, who's a conservation group. However, you would own the conservation restriction
CR,
for the
okay.
land.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
So, and that fits also with the idea that it's usually a third party that holds the conservation restriction. For instance, on Zinn Park, we have been under discussion with the 300 committee for some period of time for
Yeah.
taking over a CR there.
Yeah, so if we held the CR, Oyster Pond would still be taking responsibility for management
Yep,
along with the
all the
agreement of.
agencies of the town.
Well, and the agreement of
Yeah,
the Conservation Commission who holds the CR.
yes.
Okay, so I think you like an endorsement for us that we would be willing to hold this conservation restriction?
Absolutely.
I'd like to make a motion that on behalf of the applicant, that we be the recipients of the CR for this parcel and parcels.
Okay, so we're not actually doing the CR tonight. We're
Right.
just confirming that we will accept the
And
CR.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm comfortable with it, and I'll second the motion, but I have a question. We're talking about, on this map, we're talking about the Hui parcel, the big one that you're going to buy this, is that
Okay.
right?
There are
This-
five Hui parcels.
There are actually 5 parcels here. The
Yes.
major one that's 14 acres, a 3-acre one that's wetlands, sort of a small undevelopable parcel that's here, a developable lot area here that's off of Fells Road, and a developable parcel here that was obtained for access so that you could enter from here and exit through here because
all of them.
Hackmatack did not offer
Yes.
access. So all 5 are tossed in, and they total the basically 22 acres, 21.97.
Okay, good. And anything else, Court?
No, I don't have anything else.
Okay. Any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Okay, there's a motion and a second on the table to endorse the project and agree to hold the CR. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, request for a continuance under a notice of intent. Linda and Michael Conley, Lot 2, Gunning Point Road, for permission to construct a 4-bedroom, single-family house with a detached garage, deck with stairs, porch, front landing with stairs to install a Title V sewage disposal system, a 10 by 22-foot structural concrete slab, 4 inches thick with, what's WWF?
Worldwide Wrestling Federation.
That's what I was going for.
Well, with WWF, dry wells, outdoor shower, AC units, utilities, driveway, connect to town water, and the associated clearing, excavating, grading, and landscaping. Jen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant
on behalf of the applicant. So moved.
I'll second that, and I also will ask that when they come back for our edification, we define WWF so that we aren't confused with the World Wide Wrestling Federation.
I actually thought it was the World Wildlife Fund.
Whatever it
It
is.
shows, well, okay. Are there any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Okay, there's a motion on the table to continue this to March 26th. Jeff, I know this isn't your project, but could you pass on to Tom that we would like it staked? WWF? No, but we would like it staked at least a week ahead of time.
By the way, the WWF is welded wire fabric.
Welded
Oh.
wire fabric.
Why do they have
Oh,
it
so we can all
capitalized?
go home with that.
Why does he get it?
I didn't write it.
All right. Okay, there's a motion and a second on the table to continue this to March 26th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Padraic and Sarah McCahill, 96 Alder Lane, North Falmouth, for after-the-fact permission to expand the existing wood deck and also to remove and reconstruct storage shed, relocate the outdoor shower, install mitigation plantings and the associated clearing, grading, and landscaping. Jen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant is requesting a continuance until March 26th.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions? Any questions from the audience? Would you please,
She is already aware.
she knows
Yes,
what my concerns are.
yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, the motion is second for a continuance to March 26th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Request for continuance under an enforcement order, Gene Wright, 19 Miami Avenue, East Falmouth, for clearing, building, and altering wetland resource areas and in buffer to resource areas as defined in FWR 10.00 and 310 CMR 10.00.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant has requested time to obtain consult a professional, so we are requesting a 2 continuance for that.
So-
March 26th. Gonna be busy on the 26th.
So moved to March 26th.
Second.
Any questions?
Is there any ongoing construction?
No.
Okay.
Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, there's a motion and a second to continue to March 26th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Request for determination of applicability. And it's a relatively large audience, not nearly as large as Selectmen's meeting, thank goodness. But just to let you know, I think both of these are going to be Peters, which is Town of Falmouth Engineering. But if a negative determination is issued, is voted on, that means they can go ahead with the project. Town of Falmouth Engineering Department, care of Peter McConerty, Little Harbor Road, Butler Street, Hinckley Street, 150 feet, Cowdrey Road, Crane Street, Woods Hole, for permission to remove drainage basins from the Cowdrey Road pipe system and install infiltration basins, add 2 additional drainage basins on the north side of Little Harbor Road, install 2 drainage basins at the base of Butler Street to catch stormwater, and to mill and overlay 2.5 inches of asphalt over Little Harbor Road, Butler Street, and approximately 150 feet of Hinckley Road. Jen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, the staff has reviewed the project and we are recommending a -2 under the statement bylaw. There is one alteration to this plan. Peter, you're going to be putting 2 additional catch basins on the west side of Butler Street, correct?
Correct.
We're adding 2 to address some abutter concerns.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? That's Peter McConerty for the home audience who didn't know.
Yeah, just a quick note, we were looking at paving the Cowdery Road and Crane Street. Cowdery Road runs from basically the gates to where the steamship authority is, up the top of the hill and down to Little Harbor. And Crane Street runs from Woods Hole Road to Cowdery. It was a state alterated route, and they altered it and discontinued it back in the 1960s, early 1960s. So at this time, we had planned on paving those two roads, but that portion of the paving will wait because there's some other areas that I got to take care of on those roads as far as the road layout.
First,
Correct.
Okay.
That's for Cowdery and the little portion of Crane Street.
okay. Mike?
I represent one of the abutters, and I want to thank the town of Falmouth for listening to my client's concerns, and we support the project.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Any other comments? Okay, there's a motion and a second on the table to accept staff's recommendation of a negative determination, which means Peter can go ahead with, and I suppose John, is it John's group that will be doing it?
Correct, and the contractors, town contractors.
Okay.
Correct.
All in favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Next, Town of Falmouth Engineering Department, care of Peter McConerty, Water Street, Albatross Street, North Street, Millfield Street, Woods Hole, for permission to replace sidewalls and to install asphalt overlay on these roads, along with cleaning all drainage basins and evaluating, repairing deficiencies, and to install 2 drainage basins at the intersection of Millfield and Quistit Avenue to catch stormwater to infiltrate into the ground. Jen?
Again, Madam Chairman, we reviewed the project, they were recommending a negative 2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So moved.
Second, with one question.
Okay?
What's your timeline on this one?
The timeline on this one, as you know, Woods Hole, that
Gets
area
busy?
of Woods Hole got hit hard this past fall and winter. So with the gas company, Newco is down there continuing the gas main work. I had a meeting with the gas company this morning. They're continuing. They're hoping to have their work done by the end of the month. And then our contractors will go in at the end of the month and do the work that we need to do, mill the road, pave the road. And then areas of the sidewalks, it's not all the sidewalks, it's areas of sidewalks that need to be repaired. They'll come back in the fall to do that, so it'll give Woods Hole and the restaurants the summertime to have their restaurants open and
What a good
free of
answer.
contractors.
Great answer, thank you.
When can you start paving?
The asphalt plants is scheduled to open up April 1st.
April 1st? Okay. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, the motion and second on the table to accept staff's recommendation. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank
It's
you.
an early meeting tonight. Continued requests for hearings under a notice of intent. All hearings of the Falmouth Conservation Commission are heard simultaneously under the authority of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Falmouth Wetlands Bylaw. Although a single decision is issued, it represents a separate decision under each authority. First is Stephen Parker, 378 Acapesket Road, East Falmouth, for permission to raise, R-A-Z-E, the existing dwelling and construct a 4-bedroom, single-family house with an attached garage, decks, porch, front entry, and walkway to install a new Title V sewage disposal system, underground utilities, water service AC units, outdoor shower, driveway, native mitigation plantings, and the associated clearing, grading, and landscaping. Jen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, the board had a couple of requests as to the staff, to pull the house back, and Jackie did that.
Yes.
And you did your calculations to address that.
Correct, yep.
Good evening, Jeff.
Hello, I'm Jeff Ryther with BSS Design, representing Steve Parker. I was here 2 weeks ago. We had the house 7 feet closer to the water. We were trying to match sort of these stairways that wrapped around the house. If you had gone to the site, you would have seen these large retaining walls and stairways. But it was determined by the commission that those really weren't part of the house, that I'd have to hold the distance from the top of the bank. A couple of these points here in the bank pushed the house back because the distance here off to the side had to be matched by the distance here, you know what I mean, twice. So we then had to pull the house back 7 feet to match those distances from, which is now deck over full foundation, if you've been there, with a walkout, versus this new foundation here. That's here. This, the new deck, by the way, is 9 feet back from the face of the current deck. So then we took those, proposed to take these walls out in those stairways and then grade back into the coastal bank. I've also added a row of native plantings along the top of the bank. If you looked at the the calculations, you'll see that there's no mitigation required because of the amount of impervious surfaces that we're deleting in this project, so, and pulling it back. And in the description, it was a new septic was called for, but this is an existing upgraded system, only used about a year now, but
So you're going to use
just
that.
clarifying that.
Yeah.
We're hooking into that system,
Okay.
and there's a note for that right here.
And there will be some planning, right, where you're...
Yeah, there's
where you're
restoration.
modifying those,
I called it out here and here and up here. Those are the restoration is on these two flanks plus that row of
Okay.
native plants.
Are there any other questions?
By the way, it's on here, March 3rd is a revision. There's a few listed there.
We had that question, didn't we?
This one
You
here,
got-
was this the walkway down to the beach here? The second one?
Yeah, we,
That's new, right? Or is that the old one that,
I think I have to look at your plan here.
this one here?
Yeah, that has been taken out. At the time when we drew this plan, that hadn't been done.
Okay.
So it still remained on the drawing. But the new dock is in, and that stairway's out, and it has,
So you're gonna replant that area right here?
yes, that's under another order of conditions though, with a dock.
Okay, so there's gonna be one stairway down to the beach here,
That's
and
the
it's gonna be
original.
this one right here. So this is gone.
Okay.
There was a comment made last time about potential runoff going down that, so they've barriered that off with silt fence. Put a little dig in the toe
Yeah, until they
detail.
get some planting.
Yeah, yeah,
Could
they're not
you,
gonna plant until probably
Can
next
you
month.
circle, and is this, can
This
you
is
give me
the
the
record.
official one? Can you just circle it? And then,
Which one is that?
well, is that the official?
Yeah, so one was in the file.
Oh, okay.
It was the new one.
Yeah, this
Just-
is a new one, it should have the mark
March 3rd revision.
right here.
Yeah, but just circle that stairway and say that that's gone, and initial it,
Okay.
and put today's date. And then could you submit another plan without that on it?
All right. I mean, it was just pulled up when I first, okay, we can do that.
No, I mean, we discussed it, but if somebody's looking at the plan, if somebody's building something, they might say, oh, we needed to have another stairway there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeff, how long has that fiber roll been at the base?
I would say going on about 2 years.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it worked out pretty well.
Yes.
The grass is growing in, the beach grass, quite well, and the new shrubs are doing well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Make a motion to close and take it under advisement.
Second?
Any questions from the audience? Okay, motion on the table to close the hearing and take it under advisement. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.
Thank you, nice job.
Lyndon Michael oh, wait a second. John Billings, 57 Gunning Point Avenue, Falmouth, for permission to construct a 4-bedroom, single-family house with detached garage, deck with stairs to install a Title V sewage disposal system, dry wells, utilities, driveway, retaining wall, connect to town water, resource area improvements, and the associated clearing, excavating, grading, and landscaping. Request for a variance under FWR 10.13 from the performance standards set out in FWR 10.185A3D.
Madam Chair, I need to recuse
Recuse
myself
yourself?
due to family connections with the bills.
All right, you note that, Susan?
And I'll allow Mike to make a motion for adjournment at the appropriate time.
Or you're going home?
I'm gonna go watch the hockey game.
All right.
I can text you a score.
It's all right.
Jen?
Your
you have any
diligence is
comments?
noted.
I'll say that in my comments and
Good evening, Brian.
Good evening, Madam Chairman. For the record, my name is Brian Wall, and I'm an attorney, and I represent the applicant in this case. And what I'd like to do is just give you a broad overview that this is a proposed single-family dwelling with a septic system and appurtenances on a vacant lot on Gunning Point Road. There are some significant issues that you'll hear tonight as far as the variance is concerned, so I'm going to address those last. What I'd like to do is simply introduce the team at the moment. You're going to hear tonight an overview of the project from Michael McGrath. You're going to hear some characteristics of the coastal bank from Stan Humphreys from LEC Environmental. You will hear from Brian Madden, also of LEC Environmental, regarding the wildlife habitat qualities of the bank. Then you will hear from Jen Exner from Wilkinson Ecological Design regarding a land management plan, and then from me regarding the variance. And while that sounds like a lot, each person has a relatively brief presentation, and so we'll get right to it, and then we'll open it up for questions after that.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Good evening, Mike.
Good evening.
I can only assume we get these special maps because people think that we can't
Thank you.
see up there. But it is nice to have them, actually. Be nice to get them with them.
My name is Mike McGrath. I'm a registered engineer and professional land surveyor. I work for Holmes & McGrath. My firm prepared the plan. The first thing I should do is describe the site. The site is a vacant lot on Gunning Point Avenue in Sippowisset. The locus map shows you approximately where it is. The particular project is to construct a single-family house, a proposed garage. There's a septic system. There's an existing path that's going to be left alone, and you're going to hear about a restoration of a swath of the existing vegetation from Ms. Exner. What I have done is I should describe first the wetland resources that exist on the site. There's a coastal dune, a coastal beach, land under the ocean, land containing shellfish. The dune is marked right here. Dune is in here. There's a coastal beach. There's land under the ocean, land containing shellfish. There's also land, there's an isolated freshwater wetland that's off this color plan, but if you look at the full-size plan, there is a isolated wetland that's on the adjacent lot. There's also floodplains. There's a velocity zone that's located here. There's another velocity zone here. There's an A zone that's marked as A10 elevation 19. There is two boundaries shown on the plan. There is one that comes from the FEMA website, but when we actually measured the elevation on the grounds, we found that there's a finger-like projection that was not shown on the flood insurance rate map. The flood insurance rate map we used was one that was obtained from the website. It has a revision date of August 8th, 2006. In the notice was a series of exhibits that showed you how we determine the location of the velocity zone. We are trying to overcome the presumption that we add 25 feet to the boundary of the velocity zone. And what we did is, there is when the town adopted the original flood maps in the middle 70s, there was an appeal filed by the town of Falmouth, and the town of Falmouth agreed with FEMA to prepare 1 inch equals 100 topographic maps. Those are the town topographic maps that are dated 1975. They're the base map that's used for the floodplain. This is different than every other town because usually the base maps for the early flood zones were the quadrangle maps. The bottom line is we've given you 2 sketches with overlays on them. We use the tip of 2 groins as control points. We have done a best fit, and we believe that that's the location of the actual boundary of the velocity zone. We also said that the thickness of the floodplain boundary on the FEMA map was 10 feet. The town topographic maps were prepared with in accordance with the then national map standards. 90% of the objects had to be within 1/40th times the scale of the map, or 2.5 feet. The bottom line is that we believe that the error is much less than 25 feet, and we asked the board again to consider that that's the precise location. The 25-foot regulation, we spoke against it at the time. It was based on a recommendation of a wetland scientist from Marion who told the commission at the time that the boundary was 25 foot wide in the maps. That was incorrect. And the bottom line is I've stamped the plan showing where I think it is. There is a coastal bank on the boundary. The coastal bank has, the coastal bank is shown here. There's the top of the coastal bank up in this location. The boundary of the coastal bank is based on the slope. The notice says that transect AA is 8%, transect AA is 12%. It's 1/8. So that's a typo in the notice narrative. So if you look at transect AA, it says 1/8. That's 12%. So we have determined the coastal bank from the requirements that it's all the land that's 10% up to the flood zone, or up to the nearest area where it drops below 10%. The coastal bank is a resource area. It's not a wetland. It's actually upland. One of the things I wanted to make sure you understood is that this coastal bank, because of the different criteria in your regulations, you have performance standards in your regulation for work that could be done on a coastal bank. The bottom line is that this is why I turn this the same direction. I believe that under your regulations, we could actually do work on a greater portion of the coastal bank because the coastal bank doesn't have a wetland at the base. There are certain setbacks in under 1030. So I believe we could actually alter this area in this location based on your performance standards under 1030. We then talk about the resource area buffers. We have a disagreement between us over the resource area buffer. You have a certain type of varying width of resource area buffer A and B based on certain criteria that's in the regulations. And what we did is we have been consistent as far as we're concerned in the boundary of how resource area buffers have been determined. In the notice, I give you 4 plans that show a precedent where we have gone landward from an area of a coastal bank. We haven't swung an arc. In the denial, you seem to want that the resource area buffer goes on a swing. If we do that, you cannot build on this lot. This lot is assessed at over $2 million. So in the notice, I gave you copies. I highlighted where we have the same condition as we show here. The bottom line is we show that there's a different resource area buffer in this area compared to this area. We believe that there's no requirement for a resource area buffer in this location. And those precedents are almost exactly as it is shown here. So we believe that that is an appropriate thing for you to do. If you don't agree with us, well, I should say, over and over again, when it talks about resource area buffers, it says the boundary of the resource area buffer is the distance measured horizontally from the resource to 100-foot landward. Over and over again, your regulations, FWR 1018-5B, says the width is landward. So we say that since the coastal bank is a slope and we're going landward, we would be going perpendicular to landward if we were to agree that this resource area buffer comes in a sweep and an arc. The other point is that, besides the precedents, we didn't think that it was appropriate to basically condemn this lot. In any case, in order for us to overcome the presumptions on the resource area buffers, you identify that resource area buffers are supposed to protect public and private water supply, groundwater, flood control, erosion and sediment control, storm damage prevention, water pollution control, fisheries, shellfish, wildlife habitat, agriculture, aesthetics, recreation, and agriculture. I think that we would all agree that none of those really apply to if there's a resource area buffer at the top of the coastal bank. It's not going to affect any public or private water supply. It's not going to protect groundwater. It's not going to protect flood control. It's not going to affect erosion. It's not going to erosion and, I'm sorry, I skipped the word, sediment control. It's not going to protect storm damage prevention. It's not going to protect water pollution control. It won't affect fisheries, shellfish, agriculture, aesthetics, recreation, and aquaculture. So the only resource value left is wildlife habitat. So other people are going to speak on wildlife habitat, but the other thing that I wanted to make sure you understand is when you talk about the presumptions of these resource area buffers, you continually say things like naturally vegetated resource area buffers reduce the adverse impacts of adjacent land uses to wetlands. A coastal bank's not a wetland. A buffer of land in a naturally vegetated condition protects an adjacent wetland, in part by reducing runoff, absorbing nitrate, phosphorus, and other chemical pollutants by filtering suspended solids or by stabilizing banks and channels. There's no channel here. But as far as I'm concerned, I've designed many of these sites. I've never seen erosion that would ever destabilize this coastal bank. This coastal bank is very densely vegetated. I also want to talk about coastal bank. If you look at the performance standards for coastal bank, it says, when the commission determines that a coastal bank is significant to storm damage prevention or flood control because it is a vertical buffer to storm waters. I'm going to stop there. So when you have a resource area buffer to a vertical buffer, and it would seem to me that since there has to be a balance between the value of the land and environmental offsets, and it just seems to me that given what I know, I think that you should be deciding that the private rights and the economic value of this lot are much greater than any loss of wildlife habitat. I have a varied background. I did all of the permitting for the Ballymead subdivision, including both golf courses, including the subsequent last phase. I did EIRs. I was the lead firm or a major firm in all of the presentations. In the mid-'80s, I met Aaron Moen. He was a PhD in wildlife biology. He had an hypothesis that the carrying capacity of land is based on the amount of calories available. He said, or he predicted, that the destruction of woods to create golf courses and suburban habitat like exists at Ballymead would not cause a significant loss of white-tailed deer. I believe that he was right and has been proven right. I have a different kind of background that you probably don't know, or some of you know, but I built, operated, and maintained, permitted the first denitrifying septic system in Massachusetts. 12 years ago, I formed a company that makes an innocuous carbon for denitrification. I don't have anything to do with the company. I'm a customer of them. But as of 2 years ago, they had produced enough organic carbon for denitrification to have removed about 18 tons of dissolved nitrogen from water, something I started. When I look at the treatment of water, I focus more, instead of what a traditional engineer is, I look at carbon. You have received some final effluent results from Matria. Final effluent is less than 3 parts per million of total nitrogen, less than 3 parts per million, 6 parts per million, and 4 parts per million. That's very good removal for a healthcare facility. So the bottom line is I have a different approach because I create enormous populations of bacteria that can do the work because I add carbon. So when I think about what Aaron Moen said, and I realize there's more carbon dioxide in the air, there's now more small prey animals. I gave you in the narrative that I interviewed Chuck Martinson. He says they found 8 fisher cats dead on the sides of the roads in the last 2 years. I also gave you a copy of an article in the Boston Globe called "The Woods Are Lovely, Dark and Back," and it describes how there could be no doubt that wildlife's back, wildlife's increasing dramatically. So I say that if you consider the balance between private rights and wildlife habitat, there's enough evidence that says the wildlife seem to be doing all right by themselves. I also wanted to point out, I've given you a couple of area maps here. Exhibit A is from your town website. It's the green. It doesn't show precisely how much vegetation's here, but if you were to take out the 8,800 square feet, it's way less than 1% of the green areas here. This plan shows you that there is open space dedicated here. This is the Town of Falmouth Conservation Commission, B.B. Woods, and this is the 300 committee around Plume Pond. So there is significant wildlife area around. The other thing that you were concerned with, or you wrote, was that I did not satisfy the conditions of the regulations because the septic system is less than 100 feet back from the coastal bank. So what I've done is I prepared an exhibit.
Pass it up.
Yeah, I'll give one to Jimmy. Yes. Thank you. It's colored, so. And what I did was I drew basically a cross-section from the septic system. It's right here, it's transect DD. If you look at the plan, there's a log from a soil test. Title 5 is focused on hydraulic efficiency. So there's sandy looms. There's basically 3 different types of sandy looms. what the plan calls for is this area gets, all of the natural soils are considered impermeable under Title V, so we have to take them out and we have to put in Title V sand, which is basically a coarse sand. So the point of this is that the water will drop rapidly through the sand that's going to be placed there. It will not, in my opinion, go laterally into the sandy loam. It'll drop very quickly down to the loamy sand, then it'll travel down through the groundwater towards Buzzards Bay. On the cross-section, it's about 208 feet from the edge of the soil absorption system to, I think it's mean high water. No, it's actually above that. I drew the cross-section to elevation 5.5, which was the approximate elevation of the bottom of the sand. So there's about 208 feet there. The Buzzards Bay has not been identified as a nitrogen-stressed area. What we did as part of the project revision is we did reduce the number of bedrooms shown on the plan, and I believe that this is far enough away that there's no need to do any further treatment because it is far enough away that I don't think we have to. So, again, I just want to talk about one thing. Drainage was, before we did agree, and we kept this up, that this, we're showing that there's a swale in this area to keep the water, I'm sorry, I pointed it wrong. The swale starts at the driveway and swoops around this, and then we surface flow through here. So I believe that our plan shows appropriate type of drainage for a single-family house. In any case, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I believe that I think probably the next person to present is Stan Humphreys.
Good evening. Stan Humphreys, Senior Coastal Geologist with LEC Environmental. Addressing the interest of storm damage prevention and flood control in this, in the vicinity of the proposed project, and including the coastal bank specifically, we're looking to protect the stability of the coastal bank. As Mike described, it's very well vegetated. The slopes are very low, basically marginally meeting the definition of coastal bank. And the physical characteristics within the area of the proposed alterations include the soils, slopes, topography, and drainage. With the soils, as Mike has described them, being removed to place in 3 dry wells. There are some slope changes, particularly with respect to the grading around the grassy swale that he mentioned. And the topography is generally flat, and it will stay flat. So in regard to the performance of the project, I don't see that there are drainage impacts that will move from the buffer area into the coastal bank. In fact, I think the dry wells are going to improve that situation. And there will not be any runoff or overland flow impacts to jeopardize the stability of the coastal bank. So basically, in summary, I don't think that the project will have any adverse effects on the coastal bank.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Hi, good evening. Brian Madden, wildlife scientist at LEC Environmental. To address wildlife habitat issues, when evaluating any particular project, you don't necessarily look always just on-site, you look on and off-site to evaluate the full extent of conditions. In our report that we submitted, we identified a series of mapping tools that are easy reference points to provide a little bit of insight whether or not a particular project site can offer some important habitat value. And just to quickly go through those, we know that the site is not within an estimated or priority habitat for rare species mapped by natural heritage. There's no certified or vernal pools. There's certified or potential vernal pools located within the vicinity of the project site. The site is not located within a core habitat or critical natural landscape identified by the biomap 2 of the town. The site is not within an ACEC, not identified within Cape Cod Commission significant natural resource area, and not within a critical habitat area for plants or wildlife identified by the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. We know that this particular lot is the last remaining lot on the outer perimeter of Gunning Point Ave, and one of the last remaining lots within the entire 200-lot Sippawisset subdivision. It's removed and separated by off-site conservation areas. To the north, the 4-acre Salt Pond Bird Sanctuary site around a little salt pond, Flume Pond Conservation Area to the south, and BB Woods located off this map further to the east of Sippawisset Road. The neighborhood itself is highly fragmented, and all that is remaining is fringing fragmented strips of forested upland. And the aerial may be a little bit misleading in the sense that if you look at a vegetated landscape that it's all fully vegetated, when in fact there are areas that trees may exist but the understory is maintained, and there's various paths, various fences, et cetera, that do factor into the overall landscape context. The site itself is wedged in between single-family dwellings to the north and to the south. In summary, the site doesn't have any undisturbed connectivity to any critical habitat areas. In one sense, from a landscape context perspective, it has poor landscape context from a wildlife habitat perspective. And then basically looking on-site, within the limit of work, within the buffer to the coastal bank, there are various native young trees and saplings. Black cherry, black oak, and red cedars are basically the 3 species out there. But a lot of the species are, a lot of those trees are getting choked out by invasive vines. And I do have some photos that just illustrate that. I can pass around just for view. In addition to the invasive vines within the buffer to the coastal bank, the dominant shrub within the understory is bush honeysuckle, invasive honeysuckle. It forms a near monoculture across the limit of work itself. So within the buffer itself, the buffer does not provide any critical habitat for any coastal bank dependent wildlife species. There's no unique or important habitat features specific to the buffer. It does provide limited habitat for ecological generalists such as songbirds, but it is greatly diminished by the landscape context and the presence of the invasive species. Specific to the coastal bank itself, it's not a sensitive resource area. It's well vegetated, non-eroding, gradual slope. Similar to the buffer zone, the coastal bank does not offer any essential habitat for specific species dependent upon a coastal bank. Under typical scenarios, a coastal bank may provide unique important habitat for bank swallows or kingfishers, providing a vertical sandy bank. that habitat feature doesn't exist. It is well vegetated, so it could offer some habitat for songbirds, generalist species, and provide some shelter for small mammals, et cetera. But again, similar to the buffer, the coastal bank's ability to provide wildlife habitat is greatly diminished by the presence of the invasive species and the surrounding landscape context. So the proposed work in of itself will not adversely affect the resource area, being the coastal bank's ability to provide these wildlife habitat functions. Won't reduce its capacity to provide the functions. In fact, it will be greatly enhanced by the land management plan proposed by Wilkinson Design. The proposed work itself is consolidated in a roughly 100 by 100 foot rectangular footprint. Again, single family homes to the north and to the south. The migratory pathways through the site will be maintained, again, greatly diminished by landscape context, but there's about 120 foot wide vegetated area between the coastal beach and proposed development footprint. The existing path on the northern portion of the site will remain, so that opportunity will exist post-construction. And you know, again, just in closing, the project itself will not adversely affect the coastal bank's ability to provide wildlife habitat, but will be greatly enhanced by the land management plan proposed by Wilkinson Ecological Design. And I'll let Jen take it over from here.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, Jen.
Good evening. For the record, Jen Exner from Wilkinson Ecological. It's nice to see you all again. It's been a couple months. So we were also asked to join the project team, and we were asked to evaluate the property to specifically identify opportunities to improve the resource areas that are on site. Basically, in summary, our land management plan proposes to enhance the quality of the wildlife habitat within the property. The majority of the site is characterized by vegetation that is consistent with the maritime shrubland community. In general, coastal shrublands are declining both in area and in ecological integrity. They are ranked an S3, or a vulnerable plant community, by Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. They do, as Brian said, they do provide some habitat, and they do provide that to many obligate shrubland species. One of the most significant documented threats to maritime shrublands are invasive plant species, as I'm sure you're well aware. Basically, conservation of maritime shrublands is kind of an interesting concept, because conservation of that particular plant community is often dependent on periodic disturbances. In this location at Gunning Point, it does appear that the shrubland is naturally maintained by wind and wind-driven salt spray coming off of Buzzards Bay. That's evident by the height of the trees and the shrubs on the property. Given this perpetuation of the shrubland habitat without any active management does heighten the value, in our opinion, of this particular plant community on the site. Invasive plants, as Brian said, do occur throughout the site, and as you would expect, they're more pervasive along the edges of the path, along Gunning Point Avenue, and just landward of the coastal beach. The dominant invasive species in these areas are shrub honeysuckle, vine honeysuckle, as well as Asiatic bittersweet. The proposed project activities in our land management plan are intended to maintain, promote, and improve the site's capacity to continue providing the shrubland thicket habitat that currently exists on the site. These activities do include the removal and subsequent follow-up management of invasive species and the replanting of native shrub and herbaceous species. These areas are the areas within the shrubland that are the most highly invaded. Were located in the field, and they were included on the site plan submitted by Holmes and McGrath, so you can pretty clearly see where the highest concentration of invasives is on the property. And with that, I think I'll leave it to the next person.
That's Brian. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, and good evening. My job is to present the variance. So what I'd like to start off by saying is that this commission saw a project that was very similar to this last fall. It was the same lot, obviously. It was a slightly bigger house. And we took the position, based upon the regulations and the buffer regulations, to draw the buffer zones in a manner that went landward, which resulted in our position that there was not a buffer zone adjacent to most of the coastal bank on the property. But the commission disagreed. And so we're back before you now with this particular project, and I'm now saying, and we are saying, that there is in fact a buffer zone adjacent to the coastal bank, because that is what the commission determined it to be. And we are now asking for a variance from your buffer zone regulations. But I want to state for the record that we're preserving our legal right to challenge that, because we did in fact file an appeal of the initial denial, and that this request is being submitted without prejudice and with a reservation of rights. But having said that, we're going to make a presentation that we think a variance in this particular case is in fact warranted. So having said that, let's begin with this. The project, as I just said, under the commission's ruling, does not meet your buffer zone regulations, specifically FWR 1018-5A3D, which is essentially the 50-foot no disturb zone to a coastal bank. The applicant cannot construct a house on this particular property and meet this regulation. Accordingly, we're asking for the variance from it. The commission has in fact contemplated that there would be occasions when an applicant would not be able to meet all of your regulations, and therefore the commission adopted a variance procedure in section 1013 of your regulations. This particular provision allows the commission to vary the strict requirements of the bylaw and the regulations. And it also balances, and I think it seeks to balance, the property rights of the property owner to develop their property in a reasonable manner. And it also requires us to balance those interests against the bylaw by requiring this applicant, one asking for a variance, to do things above and beyond what a normal applicant would do. For instance, file for mitigation that you cannot normally require. The threshold requirement is that there be a hardship. And if a hardship is established, then there are 5 criteria, which I know the commission is familiar with. So I'm not going to simply restate them. I'll get to them as I go through my presentation. A hardship is defined in your regulations as follows. When the literal application of the wetlands bylaw to a particular piece of property, evaluated in its totality, owing to the unique characteristics of the property, is unduly oppressive, arbitrary, or confiscatory, and would cause the applicant substantial economic loss. So here's our presentation. This particular lot goes back to 1897. That's when it was created, when a subdivision plan for 200 lots, known as the lots at Sippawisset, was recorded at the Registry of Deeds. I have the ability to present a very unique situation tonight because the family that I represent, the 2 estates that are the applicants, have owned the property for 103 years. An ancestor of Mr. Billings, his grandfather, purchased the property in 1911, and it's been in the family for the 103 years since. The lot was purchased well before the adoption of the wetlands bylaw, which was adopted by the town in 1978, and well before the problem regulation that we're having now. The regulation that we cannot meet was amended by the commission in 2008. So the ability to build existed up until the end, February of 2008. The lot is 28,100 square feet. It was definitely buildable when it was purchased in 1911. It has been assessed by the town of Falmouth as a buildable lot ever since, including presently. The 2014 assessment is $2,700,000. The annual tax rate I calculated based upon the tax rate for the current year. It's approximately $20,000 that's being paid on taxes on this vacant lot. The lot is basically the same or similarly sized as all the other 200 lots in the subdivision. And certainly, as I said, the Billings family had a reasonable expectation that when they purchased it, they could build on it. It is also, as Brian Madden mentioned, and I think Mike McGrath said, it's the very last undeveloped lot on the outer perimeter of Gunning Point, and we believe it's one of the last, if not the last, undeveloped lot in the entire 200 lot subdivision. The hardship in this case arises for one reason, which is the commission's adoption of the current version of FWR 1018 on February 1st, 2008. That is what created the 50-foot no disturb zone that we cannot meet. A strict application of this 50-foot no disturb zone will render the lot unbuildable, which will obviously render a substantial economic loss because the $2 million assessment that the town has on the property is predicated upon someone being able to build the lot. If you can't build on the lot value will drop precipitously, and we contend that it will be essentially valueless. Although not specifically part of your regulation, there is a footnote that provides a comment to your regulation. And so once again, I state that I don't think this is one of your requirements, but there's a footnote that says variances should only be granted in unique or rare and unusual circumstances. Even though it's not a criteria, we believe we meet those descriptions for the following reasons. The definition of uniqueness exists because this is the last undeveloped lot in the area. It's unique because it's the only one. Secondly, what's unique about this is that the application at issue renders the lot entirely unbuildable. So this is not a case where you have somebody coming forward that wants to add on to their property or put a deck or do something like that, and then they run into a problem with the regulation and they can't meet it. That may or may not be a hardship under the circumstances, but what's rare and unusual about this is the application of the regulation renders this particular lot completely unbuildable, and that's not something that this commission sees typically. For those reasons, we believe that we've established a hardship. Once an applicant gets over a hardship, you get into the 5 criteria, and so I'll go through those briefly. The first is that the project does not meet one or more of the performance standards. And as I said before, we contended in our first presentation last fall that we do in fact meet all of your requirements and all of your performance standards. But because of the way the commission interpreted the way the buffer zones are supposed to be configured on this lot, we now don't meet one of those. And again, I'm saying that with a reservation of rights. So by not meeting it, we meet the criteria of the variance. The second criteria requires that mitigating measures and conditions be proposed that will contribute to the protection of the resource areas. And you've already heard what those are tonight. The first is that the applicant is proposing to maintain a naturalized path and habitat trail on the northerly side of the property and to plant that area with native plantings in order to provide cover for wildlife to get from the coastal bank and beach area up to the upland areas. The second provision is that, and this was what Jen Exner addressed, is that there is important coastal shrubland on this property that is a diminishing resource in your area. The land management plan that we are proposing will foster, maintain, and improve that habitat by managing the invasive species and by supplementing it with native plantings. What I would submit to you is the reverse is also true. If the variance is not granted and the lot is not able to be built, then the invasives will not be managed, and that will adversely affect this very important habitat. And finally, the applicant has in fact modified the project, as I alluded to earlier. The last time we came in, we had one more bedroom. We have one less this time. We have a smaller septic system, and we have a smaller dwelling. The point being is that the applicant has made every effort to reduce the property to the point that the applicant thinks is reasonable under the circumstances. To be frank, we're not proposing a bungalow on this lot because that wouldn't be the appropriate structure for this type of lot, but we do believe that we're proposing a relatively appropriate, very appropriate, and relatively modest house given the others in the neighborhood. We believe that those mitigation proposals will, if they're imposed as conditions, will contribute to the protection of the resource areas. And I somewhat stuttered there because I want to go back to the beginning. We don't believe there are any adverse effects on the bank, and so we don't think that there's anything that we actually have to mitigate, but we're proposing the mitigating measures to further and foster contribution towards protection of your interests. In other words, we're asking for the variance because we need a little wiggle room from the 50-foot requirement, and what the commission gets back as part of the variance procedure are all of these mitigation measures which would not have to be proposed if we met the performance standards. The third criteria is a simple one. It says that the applicant must show that the project does not create a nuisance. And under the law, what a nuisance is when someone uses their property in a manner that can cause harm to neighboring properties. In the Conservation Commission context, that's generally if the project will create some erosion or some flooding if the property is developed. And you heard Mr. Humphreys testify that there will be no erosion as a result of this project, and there'll be no flooding as a result of this project, so it will not create a nuisance. The fourth prong is a little bit of an elaboration of the hardship argument. One must show a hardship in order to apply for the variance. In order to meet the variance criteria, one must show that one did not create the hardship themselves. You can't, in other words, back yourselves into a variance. In this case, I think this is a very simple argument. The the hardship was created by the adoption of the regulation at issue. The applicant didn't do that. The applicant owned the property at the time. The regulation changed. As a result, a hardship arose. Now, in the past that I've appeared before the commission, we've had a dialogue and a discussion that went something like this. Property owners such as the Billings family that have owned property for such a period of time do not have a hardship, arguably, because they could have done something like monitor the changes in the laws and the regulations of the town and then try to do something to protect themselves, like sell a lot or build a lot. And I, in the past, have said that's not the law of Massachusetts. The law of Massachusetts it applies that the variance is a result of the particular conditions of the property, not the owner of the property. And as we appear each time before you, our arguments get better and better. And so I have actually included case law in my presentation that supports what I said before and what I'm saying now. And I won't go through all of it. It's cited in my letter. But in a nutshell, the Pauling versus Bruins case from 1984 holds that a lot that is unbuildable without a variance and has no other use but that of a residential home site suffered a hardship. In other words, if you have a lot in a residential zone and there's a change in the zoning that prevents you from being able to build, that's a hardship. It's analogous here. We have a wetlands issue. We have a residentially zoned lot. We have a change in the regulation that creates a no disturbance zone that did not exist before. Now we can't build. That's a hardship. That's what Massachusetts case law says. To further the point that it runs with the land, not with the owner, I have cited case law that holds that even a person today could walk up to this property fully aware of the problem under the regulations, fully aware that it's not buildable without a variance, and that person is eligible to apply for a variance. The case is Lamb versus Zoning Board of Appeals of Taunton, and again, it's cited in my letter. And it essentially holds that it is the law of Massachusetts that a purchaser of property who has full knowledge of a nonconformity is not precluded from seeking a variance. And it cites as authority a Connecticut case called Johnny Cake versus the Board of Appeals. And that case said that if the hardship is created by the enactment of a zoning ordinance and the owner of the parcel could have sought a variance, then the purchaser has the same right to seek a variance. And why have I cited these cases? Because they stand for the proposition that if somebody can come along today with knowledge of the problem and be eligible and maintain a case for hardship, clearly a family that has owned the property for 103 years and had nothing to do with the adoption of the regulation that is causing the problem clearly has a hardship and did not create the hardship by not monitoring the changes of the law in the town. So we think that we meet that prong too. Which gets me to the last prong. The last prong says that the resource areas have to be better protected if the project is allowed than if denied, or that the project has an overriding benefit. We have to meet one or the other. We have arguments that we meet both. The first goes back to what you heard from Wilkinson Ecological Design. There's a very important coastal shrubland habitat on this property. The land management plan will foster, save, maintain, and improve that habitat, and therefore we contend that the resource areas are better with the project than without, and I think what goes hand in hand with that is the testimony you heard from Brian Madden, who said that there was no adverse effect on wildlife habitat. and from Stan Humphreys, who said there's no adverse effect on the bank. So if you have no adverse effect, balanced against an improvement of the coastal shrubland habitat, then the resource areas, when you balance them out, are better with the project than without. We also contend that we have an overriding public benefit, and the argument for that goes like this. If a house can be constructed on this property, the assessment will go up in value, and the tax revenue to the town will also go up in value. And the converse is also true. If the lot is rendered unbuildable, the assessment will go down, and therefore the town will get less revenue. The second argument is that if the lot is rendered unbuildable, the applicant will have what's called a regulatory taking claim. They can go to court and claim that because the town has adopted these regulations that are for the benefit of the public, the town has effectively taken the property for the public benefit. In our Constitution, the Fifth Amendment says the government has to pay fair market value for doing that. The public benefit is that if the variance is granted, there will be no taking claim, and therefore it saves public monies from the town for acquiring a lot that, as you heard Brian Madden say, has very limited, if any, wildlife habitat value. These are not just arguments that I'm making. This is the case law of our Commonwealth, because this was presented to the commission, these exact arguments, in the Spolaris case a couple of years ago on 78 Squibnocket Road. These exact arguments regarding tax revenue and takings were presented. Excuse me. The commission rejected those arguments, and the Spolarises took an appeal. And on appeal, the Barnstable Superior Court rejected the commission's position and said, and I quote, it was Justice Christopher Muse, he ruled that improving property by constructing a dwelling results in benefits to the public good due to increased tax revenue. And he also said with regard to the taking claim, quote, it is also a public good to maintain a balance between the enforcement of laws and the taking of private property such that one does not become the other. And so you don't have to take my word for it. This is actually case law from Barnstable County that is applicable to this bylaw under the town of Falmouth, and these two arguments that I've made have been determined by the court to be in fact correct arguments. So for all those reasons, we think that we've in fact demonstrated the criteria for a variance and a hardship, and we would ask that the commission grant such in this case. And we're available for any questions that you may have.
Oh, sure, there'll be questions. Thanks, Brian.
Arguments were made in this case as this, and the judge affirmed your decision on that and has some interesting things to say about hardship in this decision as well. I won't cite them and read from the record, but, and I think you have a copy of that, Brian, but we can provide you one if you don't.
I'm sure Brian has a copy of that.
As far as the actual project goes, my comments are pretty much the same as they were the last times. I do have a clarification question from Ms. McGrath. Like that top of coastal bank is from pretty much lot line to lot line, correct?
Yes, top of the coastal bank goes from lot line to lot line.
Okay.
She shows the top and the toe.
Top and the top. I think you show it actually on this little septic tank here.
Yeah, I show it
Okay.
on the septic tank, a little clear.
Okay, thank you. I had trouble finding that on the last time. I think there's a coastal bank on the site. I think that coastal bank, that's staying live within your velocity zone. I understand Mr. McGrath's argument on the velocity zone, but your regulations do presume that there is a 25-foot offset. So that coastal bank lies within a velocity zone. In accordance to your regulations, you do need a 50-foot buffer on that. So it's, the project as proposed, staff's belief that it does not meet your current regulations, because it does not have that 50-foot buffer. It was nice to see the habitat restoration plan. That was, I was listening, that was nicely done. And pretty much, that's it.
Could you also fold the fall record into this?
Oh, if the board wants, you can put the previous
I
record.
just did.
Oh, okay, there you go.
This member wants it.
Yeah, okay. So we'll add that record in there, and you might also want to add the plan from 61 Gunning Point, because if you put the two plans together, it actually, you can see the coastal bank in its entirety, almost much clearer that way, as it stretches across the landscape along Gunning Point.
That's fine. And I have some pictures in that last file that shows the 54 hurricane along that coastal bank.
That said, there were a lot of, I think, contradictions in the presentation, because Mr. McGrath was saying one thing, that there wasn't a buffer, and Brian, you were saying that there is a buffer.
What I
We
said,
have two documents, one saying there is a buffer, and that you don't meet our regulations, and another document saying that there isn't a buffer, and you don't need to meet, that you do meet the regulations. So that was kind of confusing and contradictory to your argument.
And the plan actually should refer
to,
to the A and B buffer. That should be on the plan.
you want to see that on the plan?
I would like to see that on the plan.
We asked for that on the last plan for this particular project, and we're not provided that information. No other things. So I'll give you this, Madam Chairman, and Brian, this is the Smythe case, and then the Spolaris opposition, in which the commission does admit that they erred in judgment when granting the variances for, and forgive me, I don't know if it's Spolaris 1 or 2.
That was 2.
It was Spolaris
And
too.
you cited 1 in here.
Right, because the point I made was under 1, not under 2.
No, I understand, but I just, okay. Just wanted to clarify that, so. Other than that, Madam Chairman, I don't have any questions. Right now.
Any questions?
Mr. McGrath? Am I reading the cross-section that the proposal is to excavate about 18 feet to put in that sand?
Yes.
That's fine.
What I was trying to do in my presentation was, instead of granting a variance, you could allow us to overcome the presumptions. So, I did not mean to confuse the point.
No.
But you have the
You're-
right
you're-
to over.
There are,
He's only asking
an
about.
18, I'm getting
only
back to
asking
having a
about that.
20,
I
an 18-foot excavation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We have to dig down to the sand.
So is it going to be a boxed excavation to protect the portions of the?
Yes. It would have to.
Normally, we don't, no.
How do you?
Normally, they put that in first.
Well,
We
how
just did
big a-
one up the
how big
street,
a
and we didn't
hole?
have any,
Mike, how big a hole do you have to dig to get down 21 feet there?
the stuff stacks. It really stacks. The issue is how to get the sand in. But up the street, it was, I don't think it was more than 6 or 7 foot wider at the top than it was at the bottom. The material stacked. We did this at the, Number 32, which is, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, 32.
Can you lift that up so people can see?
I'm sorry.
Mike, what was the name on 32? Is that the one with the-
Stuart Rothman.
Yeah, okay, that was the one with the block, thank you.
Which one? Can you show it? That's by Langley Road?
Yes.
Is that the one that's going in right now?
Yes.
Okay.
And Madam Chairman,
And that-
make a clarification.
Well, wait, let me ask a question. What was how deep did you have to go there? That wasn't nearly as high, was it?
I don't recall, but there was a substantial strip on. That, you should see the ones in Scraggy Neck. They're much bigger. I have one in Scraggy Neck. We just went down 20 feet.
Okay,
My,
that was your only question?
my purpose in asking you to understand, not construction techniques, because that's your purview, but to understand just what areas would be impacted during construction. So you've answered the question.
Is that your only question?
That's it. We've heard this before, Madam Chairman.
Just want to make a clarification. Mr. McGrath said that he was trying to overcome the presumption rather than apply for a variance, that you cannot apply for a variance in the setback, correct? You're not, there is no variance.
For
Regulations, so Mr. McGrath would have to overcome the presumptions in this case.
I think I did. The only thing you asked for is nitrogen.
We didn't ask for anything.
No, your regulation said the only thing I have to address if I have a setback from coastal bank is the effect of nitrogen. There's no statutory requirement, no regulatory requirement that limits nitrogen into Buzzards Bay. So I believe I have overcome.
I didn't say anything about you overcoming them or not. I just made a clarification that variance request or provision was not applicable to the septic tank.
All right. I misunderstood.
I'm grateful for the new information that was given. It makes it a little easier to digest. When you read these things time and again, sometimes lines get blurred, and that's no pun on that whatsoever. I find a lot of what was said tonight very compelling. Thank you.
Russ?
Mike, was that, have you perk tested that property already?
Yes.
And then, did you use core samples for, to determine the soil?
No, we had an excavator out
That
there.
was
There were
it,
two
you just
test
dug
holes.
down? Okay.
You went down that far?
Yes. There's test hole logs shown on sheet 2 of your full-size plan.
Oh, okay. That's why it's disturbed in the buffer there?
We went down 200 to 225 inches.
Okay.
So that is 17, to 18 feet consistent. There were 4 test holes done.
Good for now.
Okay, I have questions for everyone. I wouldn't want anyone to feel left out. Well, actually, not a question for you, Mike, just a statement. Coastal banks are wetland resources under the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Falmouth Wetlands Bylaw regulations. There's no separation between wetlands and uplands. There are wetland resources. The coastal bank buffer is, I agree, is landward of the top of the coastal bank. And I do agree that it's directly, perpendicularly landward of the coastal bank. But because this is a coastal bank, a single coastal bank that's in the velocity zone, it requires a 50-foot buffer. Stan's presentation. He feels that there would be no detriment to the stability of the coastal bank because it's a vegetated, well-vegetated bank. But the fact is, right now, the buffer's well-vegetated. But if basically the entire buffer area is disturbed, then they're probably, you know, the amount of erosion from the top could be debated, but there will be some impact from the buffer. The discussion about coastal shrubland, how many square feet of coastal shrubland that currently exists in the buffer to the coastal bank will be eliminated by this project?
In the buffer or on the bank?
In the buffer. The buffer has a coastal shrubland also. The coastal shrubland doesn't stop at the coastal bank line. Basically, how many square feet of disturbance is there in the buffer?
That's a different question than how many square feet of disturbance of shrubland is there in the buffer. Where that, if you take a cross-section of the site, as you near where the top of the coastal bank is delineated, I would say that is basically, we are in a transition zone around that area, transitioning from coastal shrubland. Once we start getting towards the coastal bank, we do start to see, top of the coastal bank, we do start to see more seedling and sapling trees, or trees that have been kept very short due to wind in that area. And then as you transition up onto the flat, into the buffer to the coastal bank, that's where you start to see the majority of the trees get taller.
Okay, and how many square feet of disturbance is there?
To the shrubland?
Well, to the whole vegetated area of this.
That would be a calculation that was completed within the limit of work.
So it's the entire buffer then?
Basically, from the top of the coastal bank, Madam Chairman.
Right,
to
the
Gunning
limit of
Point
work
Road.
to Gunning Point Road. All right,
It is
we can
the entire
figure that out.
Because the limit of work is placed along the top of the coastal bank and along the sides of the property boundary, up a few, about 20 or so, maybe 40 or 50 feet. So from the top of the coastal bank to Gunning Point Road, there would be no buffer to the top of the coastal bank.
I also want to know why we were each given this document.
Mike, you gave us that.
I included it
Why?
in the notes.
For what purpose?
Well, it doesn't matter because they supplemented my testimony with a wildlife biologist, so you can ignore it if you choose.
But I'm sure you put it here for a point. I'm wondering what the point is. This is a lot of material. We've had,
Basically, just a list of the birds,
Well, the point was that,
just endangered species act.
the point was, well, at the time I was a little irritated, but one of the,
did you, the point was you wanted us each to have a copy of this, is
I
that right?
wanted you to understand that your buffer is adverse to some of those birds. I'll be blunt, that before you were the chairman, before Jennifer was an agent, I had a project where I tried to restore some habitat, and it would have been violated one of your resource area buffers, and I was told not to file it. And every time I think about the
Well,
lost
Do you
opportunity.
know which birds though?
Do I know which
I know
birds?
what habitat he's talking
Oh, I
about.
know.
There is, we-
It's the grassland birds.
right, and it all has to do with the philosophy of conservation management in an area. And generally, we like a mosaic of habitats here. But I don't know what your particular project was that may have had,
I was gonna create 4 or 5 acres of field,
right, I know.
but people would have had a view, and so I was told not to file it.
I'm sure that was not the only criteria in the decision. But we're not gonna argue that, we're in Gunning Point.
It wasn't just about the birds, Mike.
No, it was about the birds because there was nearby place where they were already doing it, so believe me. I believe that we should occasionally create some grasslands because
And
some
we
of those
do,
birds.
we do, some of our conservation lands are managed as grasslands, as you
That's
are
good
well
news.
aware.
Louise,
Now it's your turn, Brian. You mentioned that the family has owned this, that owns this land, the family's owned land here for 103 years. How many other lots in this area did that family own?
I don't know, and I don't see how that's relevant. This is the lot that's at issue.
It is at issue, but it's relevant if, I don't agree with you that the hardship is caused because there are regulations. We have had this argument, I'm not sure whether you and Pat have had it before a judge yet, but the fact is, we didn't have wetlands regulations prior to 1972 in the Clean Water Act. We have them now. Despite what Mike says, we have a lot more development than we used to have, and we're even now learning the impact of that development on resources, and conversely, the importance of the health of the resources to the people who live nearby. And so we have had buffer regulations since 1998. We modify, I don't know, I haven't gone through the old buffer regs to see whether this would have met them or not. It may or may not have, I don't think it would have. There was a setback, usually a 50-foot setback. I mean, I would have to go through the regulations. But the fact is, buffer regulations are put in place because buffers, which in fact not only are coastal banks wetland resources, buffers to coastal banks are wetland resources under the Falmouth Wetlands Bylaw, have important functions, and I happen to know the family who owns this does have other lots here, and I'm sure we're aware of the fact that as time passed, first of all, that there were wetlands regulations, and that the wetlands regulations were developed to protect resources. So they're aware of the fact, and they're certainly aware of the fact of people in the town who understood the implications of these resources.
Before you go to your next question, Betsy, could I just respond? You asked me about other pieces of property that the family may own. I refer you to your definition of hardship, and what it says is, hardship means the application of the bylaw to a particular piece of property evaluated in its totality. So the particular piece of property at issue is the one that's subject to the notice of intent. That's where the hardship argument is focused.
And what about this property what are the unique characteristics of this property?
I mentioned it's the only remaining undeveloped lot in this particular area.
Well, we have another project in 2 weeks that's in Gunning Point.
Well, it depends on where you draw the area, but in this particular point, it's the only undeveloped lot.
Well, and I want to make one other point. There's another lot I know of in this 1897 subdivision that was an undeveloped lot that the neighbors, you're saying that it has no value if it can't be developed for a house. I know another lot in this neighborhood that the neighbors chose to pitch in and buy to keep as open space. So building a house is not the only value that that a lot can have.
Well, I don't think we have to show only value. The criteria says substantial economic loss. So I would submit to you, Ms. Gladfelter, that the difference between the lot buildable and the lot as open space is substantially different, and therefore there would be substantial economic loss. As far as the unique argument, I already mentioned that it's one of the only lots in this area. The second thing is there's the diminishing coastal shrubland habitat. And then, as I said in my earlier argument, your variance criteria is set forth in FWR 10W13 1, and then there's A, B, C, D, and E, and then there's a procedure section in 2. The part that you're referring to that contains the words rare and unusual, that's in the commentary. It's not actually part of your regulation. It's just guidance to you. It's not a criteria that we have to meet.
It's guidance to the commission. that they
Well, it
should
says
only
there's a-
grant variances in rare and unusual circumstances.
Well, again,
Unfortunately, every time we see you, Brian, which is often, it's here for a variance.
you don't need me on the easy ones, Betsy.
Well, as I say, we've seen you quite often. Mike?
It was 2008 regulations that would have made this lot unbuildable. I say that because we were looking at one of our recent projects that was approved in 2008, and it's remarkably like this. I did not have an opportunity to look at this 1954 photographs, but I am a civil engineer that designs riprap. And in order to design riprap, I have to understand the dynamics of waves. And what I would say to you is that the height of the wave at any point is directly proportional to the depth of the water based on still water level. If the still water level is here is at 14 feet, there's no physical way that the wave would go 3 foot high, would go much further than the designation of the velocity zone shown on the plan. Because the velocity zone shown on the plan is at elevation 12. That's only 2 foot of depth. The height of the wave is about 70% of the depth, so you have to have 4 feet of water to have a 3 foot wave. So I understand that the new maps raise the still water level because of the 100-year storm, so it might go slightly inland, but there's no way that that a wave that would meet the criteria that is identified as the typical hurricane on this area would ever reach this house. So I have not seen these photographs from the '54 hurricane, but there's no way they reached the home site, so I don't see how they would have any effect. Again, I understand this is a resource area, but it's not a wetland. It's a resource area. There's a difference. A wetland, to me, should be the area that is either a beach, dune, or supports wetland vegetation.
Well, that might be your opinion, but we have Falmouth wetlands
And the final thing
by law, and it's defined as a wetland,
Well, the
defined
final-
as a resource area.
I accept your response. Let's talk about one final thing. I have to tell you that wetland protection shouldn't be aha, we got you. You should have filed in 1998 or 2008. Because how old were the buildings in 2008? They were in their 90s.
I'm not going to interrupt Mike, but my client actually wants me to inform the board that at the time of their death, they were 97 or 98, and they had been pretty ill for about 10 years before that, which gets us back, I think, before the regulatory change that we're talking about.
The other point is, it shouldn't be a good public policy to say to people, well, unless you build now, you're going to be screwed in the future. As far as I'm concerned, you should be balancing everything, and I don't see anything wrong with building this lot.
We
do balance, Mike, all the time. Every week, as you know, the board balances development, redevelopment with regulations. Unfortunately, some lots can't meet all the regulations that are put in place to balance. The wetland regulations or the wetland resource areas have a 100-foot buffer. If this board truly wanted to do that, there'd be no development in that 100-foot buffer. So they are balancing. We look at coastal banks, we look at various coastal banks differently.
Brian, I can't let you pass on the tax argument. Yes, there would be tax revenue, but yes, there would be increased demands on the town services that are balanced by, that's what taxes are for. So I don't see that as a public benefit. And as far as better protected, you're going to be decreasing, as Jen said, a nice grove of trees and some coastal shrubland habitat. You're going to be adding nitrogen to Buzzards Bay, and although you're right, Mike, it hasn't been considered a impaired water source yet, the whole purpose of the Buzzards Bay Coalition, and in particular, is to try to protect the waters of Buzzards Bay. Actually, I don't have a question for you. I just, you would have been disappointed.
You've heard my response. The Superior Court said it was.
Yeah, you would have been disappointed if I didn't. The other people who usually bring it up aren't here, so I felt.
I think we've been over that point.
Okay. Did you have another question?
No, I just, in the last several minutes, I have been, this is personally, I've been offended that they have to bring up the death of their parents. All right, I do not want to go down any other personal roads on this. The testimony that I was given, I'm ready to make a motion to close it and take it under advisement, because to wander off on a path where there's, I just, me personally, I find this offensive to bring things up like that that's necessary in any way, shape, or form in fighting for a proposal of a house. And I think that there's been compelling information given, and that I will make a motion that we can close this and take it under advisement, because I'm you know,
We're not done yet. There are
that's
people in
fine,
the
that's
audience
fine,
who
that's
wanna
just a
talk.
motion. Nobody has to second it, and that's what I
Well,
got.
let somebody second it, and then we'll. Did
I'll
you
second it.
All right. Mike, any more questions?
The day I last walked this property to take a look, there were 2, 3, 4 people other than myself walking the area. That the pathway appears to provide access to the beach,
Well, there's
the existing pathway.
There's a path further down the road that provides access. The path on the property is not a public path. It's just, it must have been by happenstance that somebody was using it. There is a path further up the road. Yeah, right here, Mr. Powers, is a path that gets to the beach, and there's an association beach up that way. But there's not a public path on this particular property.
Okay, my point with it is there seems to be public benefit to a path. If the applicant was looking for a benefit, maintaining the existing path, which is used,
Well, I think,
yeah.
you know,
I'm just bringing it up.
it would be a good point, and it would actually be a better point if this particular property was on another location on the point, because before I yielded the floor, I was going to address a housekeeping matter. I see that Mr. Eater is in the audience, and the last time that we were here, he made some arguments about the deeds. And so just as a housekeeping matter, I want to kind of take the wind out of that sail right now. This particular, there's a concept in property law that one can only give what one has. And so because this deed went out in 1911, if you read the deed, it says it goes by the beach, which under Massachusetts law means that you get, this particular property goes to the high water mark of Buzzards Bay, and it's a private beach. And as are the beaches that are adjacent to it as well. There is another area in this development where Salt Pond Bird Area Sanctuaries owns, or at least has an ownership interest in the beach, and that's where the public access is. So if this path could actually get to the beach and provide some access to the beach, it would have been something that our clients would have considered, but it only terminates on a beach that is surrounded by other private beaches. So it wouldn't facilitate any real public access.
I was trying to give you a place to go when you say it isn't the place that you can go or want to go, so you've answered my question.
Okay, and we think that we have, I appreciate the input, and we're always open to that. I think we've made a pretty good case about public benefit and improving the environment.
Okay, that's fine.
Before the hearing is closed,
Well,
I had a couple of questions.
I know there are people in the audience
Okay.
that want to talk, but you can go first.
I just want to make sure, I think if the board feels that it has enough information to close, that's fine with us, but I just want to make an inquiry. And I know that I don't often do this, but as you can tell from the presentation, there's been a lot of resources expended by the client on this application, and I don't want to have a denial on some sort of, we didn't dot an I or cross a T. So with regard to the buffer A and B on the plan, is that something that you want to see before you close, or is that something that you feel comfortable with?
That's something that if we approve this plan,
You could condition it?
we could condition that.
Okay. With regard to the septic system, I agree with Jennifer that there's no variance from those provisions, but those provisions basically say that if your septic system is not cited in strict compliance with the regulations, you can still cite it as long as you overcome the presumption. And the presumption basically says, as long as you show the system has no more of an adverse effect on the environment than a compliant Title V system. And Mr. McGrath made a presentation on that issue. Is there any more information that you require on that?
I don't think the board is ready to determine whether or not we overcome the presumption at this point.
I was just asking if you need any more information on that.
No.
No, okay. Would you like, Betsy, to see a calculation of the area, the square feet of
I
shrubland?
can actually do that myself.
Well,
I-
because actually Jennifer was able, while you were interrogating one of our party.
Interrogate.
The,
Yeah, I wouldn't quite put it that way.
In any event, what I was meant to say was that Jennifer explained to me, because I'm not a scientist, that as she used the word transition period, that the habitat transitions from below the bank up to the top and above, and so the calculation would actually require a delineation of that particular area?
No,
Okay.
I don't need that information.
Basically, Betsy wanted to know how much vegetation was going to be disturbed from within the zone A and B buffer at the top of the coastal bank. And if you look at the plan, your limit of work lies on the top of the coastal bank.
Right.
So it's pretty much everything from the top of the coastal bank to Gunning Point Road.
I don't dispute that. I just wanted to clarify because the first question had to do with the coastal shrubland.
Yeah.
Right.
And the second question had to do with what Jennifer
Yeah.
just said.
Right.
And we are proposing to replant that area, and you can condition that if you would like. My last question was if you want to see a specific planting plan on that, we can provide that as well.
No, but I do have another question for Jen.
Those were all my questions. So,
Thanks, Brad.
Jen, was the area of invasives sort of to either side of the trail? Is that what you're indicating?
Yes, the majority of the invasives that we observed on the site was on either side of the trail in this area along the, behind the coastal beach, and then up in the area above the coastal bank in the buffer zone. There was a lot of vine species in here, especially vine honeysuckle.
Okay, especially where there was disturbance, right where the trail went down, right? Yeah,
Yes.
right along that
Yes,
area.
and some of the area here, I would, based on the vegetation that was growing out near Gunning
Right, right,
Avenue,
right.
some of this was disturbed, as Mike said, due to the
Right.
the digging that they had to do, and so I would assume that there probably would have been some invasives in that area as well, probably shrub honeysuckle, maybe privet.
Yeah, some
and other vines.
had been moved to the side.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
If I may just follow up on that.
Yep,
point.
Brian?
Thank you. Yeah, as Jen was saying, basically, the test pit locations up here disturbed, so the shrub cover is non-existent. But at least in the southern half, it's intact. Hasn't been disturbed more recently. That's nearly a monoculture of bush honeysuckle, invasive bush honeysuckle. So it is likely to assume that that sort of cover did extend within the disturbed footprints as well. And a lot of the vine entanglements in that first photo that I submitted are up in this location as well.
Right, where there's been a lot of human impact from road and from the pathway.
Yep, and just to follow up, I don't know if we expressly made this clear, that the areas between the deck and the garage to the limit of work will be restored. And if it's the commission's desire to see a native shrubland, we can propose that. There are some existing arrowwood shrubs along this edge that probably could be retained as well, but that whole area would kind of be left to regrow and naturalize.
Okay, thanks,
So
Brian.
you wouldn't be maintaining any access around the back of your property?
Potentially just a footpath, anything more than that.
Okay.
Madam Chairman? Okay.
Well, it would be a 10-foot
I
footpath.
mean, if the commission,
We don't.
We always allow people to have 10 feet around their houses.
Property to
maintain it.
realistically manage their property, and you don't really have, you could have 10 feet, you have between 10 and 20 feet along the top of that bank, so there's not a lot of room.
And I think, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're referring to is the fact that 10 feet out from a structure, you don't consider that area, even if it is planted with natives, to be mitigation. Is that
Yes,
correct?
and that's
Correct.
to allow people to have a realistic
Right.
access around their property.
Right, yep. But it doesn't
I do
preclude
remember a
anybody
couple
from
of
being
old-
able to plant.
No, people can,
Right.
people
Yep.
can plant,
You
and
can
often
plant.
people put, you
Sure.
know,
It's not
I
really-
just wanted to make sure that I knew
Technically,
with the
it
10 foot
really
what
is-
you were referring to.
Yeah, it's not realistic. You know that, we all know that.
I mean, if the commission would like to condition something that putting up a split rail fence to physically demarcate that limited domestic activity, the applicants
The
would.
limit at the top of the coastal line?
Now, closer to the structures.
10 feet from the structure.
Okay,
We
okay.
We have enough information.
No.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions from the audience? Questions or comments? Arthur?
Members of the board, Ms. McKay, my name is Arthur Gaines. I'm at 61 Haynes Avenue. I'm Vice President of the Sipwasset Association, whose bailiwick runs from Quistit Harbor to Woodneck Beach. And I'm also a lot owner in the Sipwasset subdivision. And both of those areas this particular application applies to. I want to say first off that the owners of the property have been good neighbors for a long time. And I'm hoping that the interplay between the applicant and the board can result in their moving ahead with some project or other. And I don't have any specific comments about this particular project, except for the comment I've made before that applies to all SIP-OWISIT lots near the waterfront, and that is they have back lot lines. And Mr. Wall suggests that these are disputed, the legality of these lot lines is disputed, and maybe he does dispute them, but we'd like them to be shown anyway, even if they're labeled disputed, because no one knows how those disputes would come out in the end if they were pushed right through court. And the 1897 subdivision plan shows the back lot lines, and the 1903 subdivision clarification on those lots shows the back lot line. And the 2014 town assessor's map shows the back lot line. So we'd like to see the back lot line, whether someone disputes it or not, shown on this plan. That's really my only comment.
We can condition that also. Are there any other questions? Michael, you're going to make it short, aren't you?
I don't think it's really short. I had no intention of speaking today, but going in.
Tell us
But
who you are, though.
Michael Eder. So I just wanted to say, please make it a condition that we recognize there's no work proposed at that back lot line area, so it's not the purview now. Just last time this came up, you mentioned you'd make a condition to say that there was testimony saying that they disagreed. We'll leave it at that. I would just like to see that condition saying that it was brought up, but since it's not relevant for this, and you've done a great job.
Okay. Any other comments? Any other questions for the board? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table to close this hearing and take it under advisement. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What do you want? Oh. Yeah. We should all hand deliver them.
I know, I should just send a big thing back.
No private vendettas today.
Yeah, but you, because I wanted to, I was trying to follow along in here and then okay.
I'm gonna go on. I'm just organizing what I have.
On the paper.
I'm getting down to enforcement order, Gene Wright, 19 Miami Avenue, East Falmouth, for clearing, building, and altering wetland resource areas and in buffer to resource areas as defined by FWR 10.00 and 310 CMR 10.00, and that's continued to March 26th.
Mike, we have copies of all those, right? I'm sure we do.
Yes.
Yeah, I figured it.
Every one of them was an exhibit.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I just wanted to make sure.
On behalf of Macon,
Law and all.
Huh?
Thanks, Mike.
are we ready to
Thanks,
adjourn?
Mike.
We are.
On behalf of Courtney, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved.
Okay, that's fine. I'll take it. Just don't put the record away.